Welcome, dear one. You're exactly where you're supposed to be. You know, people love to say, time heals all wounds, which always makes me want to lean in, smile gently, and ask, oh, really? Has time met grief? Because from what I've seen, time doesn't heal. It wanders. It wanders around the house, opens the fridge, forgets why it came in the room, then sits down and sighs. Healing, on the other hand, takes intention and patience, and usually some tears and a half-eaten sandwich. Now listen. If this resonates, you've found the right place. Welcome to Buddhist Wisdom for the elderly, where we take aging seriously and not so seriously. Where grief gets a seat at the table, but so does laughter. Where we remember that yes, you've lost someone you love, but you are still here, still breathing, still becoming. Let me ask you something. Have you ever been laughing at a funny TV show, just for a second, and then suddenly thought, oh no, am I allowed to laugh? Or maybe you were thinking of going on a trip, or going out to lunch, or dancing just a little at your nephew's wedding, and something in you said, if I enjoy this, am I forgetting them? That, my friend, is one of the most heartbreaking lies grief tells us. That joy is betrayal. That laughter is disloyalty. And that's just one of 7 deeply human mistakes I want to walk you through today. Not because you've done something wrong, but because grief doesn't come with instructions. And yet, here you are, trying your best. This video is for you. The one who's still getting out of bed, still paying the bills, still whispering their name at night and wondering what comes next. You'll hear real stories, true insights, and even a few Buddhist teachings that don't require you to become a monk or sit in lotus position, unless you want to, in which case, please stretch first. And if you stay with me through to part 6, you'll hear the one truth that's helped the most people I've sat beside, that even after your person is gone, your purpose isn't. It just changes shape into something quieter, slower, but still sacred. And when you realize that, things begin to move again. Gently, lovingly, like wind through an old tree. So if this touches something in you, if you feel like someone finally put words to what you've been carrying, I'd be honored if you'd like this video and subscribe to our channel, Buddhist Wisdom for the Elderly. We're on a mission to reach 1,000 subscribers. Not because we're chasing fame, I mean, let's be real, we nap more than we trend, but because we want to keep creating videos for people like you. People who are grieving, growing, and still curious about how to live this life all the way through. Now grab a cup of tea, sit with me. We're not rushing. We're just going to breathe through this, one story at a time. Let's begin. Mistake 1. Rushing into a new relationship too soon. Grief has this funny way of sneaking up on you. First it makes you cry, then it makes you numb. And then, when you're walking down the cereal aisle or watching TV in the dark, it taps you on the shoulder and says, hey, you should fall in love again. And it's convincing, because the silence is loud. The bed is cold. The dinner table has one chair too many. And suddenly, just like that, you're wondering if you should sign up for a senior dating app or give that chatty guy at church another look. It's not wrong to want connection. It's human. We are wired for it, spiritually, biologically, even hormonally. That aching to be seen again, to be touched, to share the day with someone. It's sacred. But here's where it gets tricky. You think you're looking for a new person, but what you're actually searching for is the life you had before. The routine, the closeness, the familiarity, the laughter that belonged to two who knew each other's quirks and morning coffee orders. It's tempting, isn't it? The idea that someone new could come along and smooth out the grief like a fresh sheet pulled over a messy bed. But let me tell you something I've seen too many times to count. If grief is still behind the wheel, you don't want to be picking up passengers yet. Let me introduce you to Barbara. Barbara was 72 when her husband Harold passed away. They'd been married longer than most people keep their kitchen appliances. She missed his quiet strength, the way he tapped his spoon 3 times before stirring his tea. 3 months after the funeral, she met a man named Roger at her church. Roger had polished shoes, a wide smile, and he always pulled her chair out before Sunday brunch. At first, it felt nice, a little attention, a reason to put on lipstick again. But Roger moved fast, really fast. He talked about combining bank accounts. He hinted at moving in. And Barbara, sweet Barbara, felt caught between something that looked like hope and something that felt like panic. I realized, she told me, I wasn't choosing Roger. I was just trying not to be alone. And there it is, the deep truth underneath the rush. We reach for someone not because we're ready, but because we want to stop the ache. But grief doesn't work that way. It doesn't vanish because someone holds your hand. It only softens when you let it stay a while, when you stop running from it and start sitting with it. The Buddhists have a word for this, upadana. It means clinging, grasping, trying to grab onto something solid in a moment when everything feels like it's dissolving. But the Buddha didn't say don't feel. He said, be with what is. Sit with the emptiness. Let it stretch out beside you. Let it be uncomfortable. Let it teach you something. Because if you can be alone long enough to hear your own heart, not the panic, not the echo, but your true voice, then you'll know when love is actually love, not just a distraction with polished shoes. Tomas could tell you something about that. He lost his partner Manuel after 32 years together. Friends, meaning well, set him up on a dating app 3 weeks later. It'll help you move on, they said. Tomas didn't argue. He just went for a walk. Every morning at sunrise, he walked the same loop he and Manuel used to walk. He called it dating the silence. A year later, he met someone at a book club. It wasn't electric. It was gentle. It was honest. It was quiet enough that grief could sit at the table too. I met him when I no longer needed someone, Tomas said, and that's how I knew it was love. That's the lesson, really. When love grows out of peace, not panic, it's something you don't have to hold on to with both hands. It walks beside you. So if you're missing someone tonight and thinking about filling the chair they left behind, pause. Breathe. Let the ache be just an ache for now. Because you, dear one, are still healing. And healing doesn't mean finding someone new. It means finding you again. And once you're back in your own skin, love, the right kind, might just knock on your door. No rush, no pressure, just the soft tap of something real. And you'll know, because this time, you'll be ready. Mistake 2, ignoring your own health and well-being. When the one you love dies, something strange happens. It's not just grief. It's not just sorrow. It's something more slippery. It's like the part of you that remembered to brush your teeth or make a decent breakfast just takes a sabbatical. After all, if the person you took care of for years, the one you cooked for, walked beside, worried about, is no longer here, then what's the point of taking care of yourself? Now, that logic sounds very spiritual in your head. Very poetic, very noble. But here's the thing. It's also nonsense. Because you're still here, sweetheart. And as long as you're still breathing, you've got a body. And that body needs tending. Now, I get it. I've sat beside many friends after they've lost someone. I've watched them stare into the middle distance and say things like, I just don't have an appetite, while unwrapping their third sleeve of saltine crackers for dinner. This isn't judgment. This is grief in its most tender disguise. The kind that tiptoes in and makes you forget you still belong to this world. But let me remind you, gently, like a whisper from your wiser self, that your body hasn't left you, even if you feel like you've left it a little. And it's okay. Grief isn't supposed to make you do push-ups. It's supposed to crack you open enough to find what still matters. Let me tell you about Irene. She was 79. Her husband Henry passed quietly one morning, 2 days after their 53rd wedding anniversary. No drama, just breath and then no breath. After that, Irene stopped cooking. She used to make beef stew every Tuesday. Henry loved it, said it tasted like home. But once he was gone, she said the kitchen felt like a stage with no audience. So she closed it down. Microwave meals, crackers, whatever didn't require remembering. By Christmas, Irene was thinner, paler, quieter. Her granddaughter Mia, clever girl, came over one Sunday with a pot of the famous stew. No speech, no lecture, just a steaming bowl and a spoon. Irene sniffed it, blinked twice and said, "Well, damn, that smells like him." She took one bite and something shifted. Not a miracle, not a spiritual awakening, just a flicker. A reminder that she was still hungry, still here, still allowed to care for herself. That's the thing, my dear. Grief doesn't mean you stop eating. It just tricks you into thinking you don't deserve to enjoy it. In Buddhism, they talk about the precious human body, how rare it is to be born in one, how sacred it is to live in one. It's not sacred because it runs marathons or drinks kale juice. It's sacred because it feels, because it loves, because it weeps and it laughs and it wrinkles and it aches and still gets up for tea in the morning. So please, eat something warm. Drink water that hasn't been sitting in the glass since yesterday. Take your medicine, not because you're supposed to, but because there's a little spark of life in you that's still glowing. And that spark, it's holy. Let yourself be cared for, by yourself, by someone else, by life itself. You're not done yet, not by a long shot. Even if your steps are slower and your breath is heavier, you're still dancing in your own quiet way. And that dance matters. Mistake 3, making big financial decisions too soon. Let's get one thing straight, my friend. When your beloved dies, the world doesn't slow down. It speeds up like it's late for a dentist appointment. Everyone starts knocking at your emotional door, with good intentions and questionable timing. Sell the house, call the bank. Let's get your affairs in order. Affairs? You're barely keeping your pants on right now. They mean well, of course. They're trying to be helpful. But they don't realize you're currently time traveling, riding waves of memory, swimming in socks that still smell like the one you lost, eating crackers for dinner because boiling water feels like a bit much. And then suddenly, bam, you're signing papers, selling things, making moves. Why? Because doing something feels safer than doing nothing. And because sitting still with that big aching space next to you on the bed, that's the hardest yoga pose of all. There's a beautiful little Buddhist line that says, "The mind seeks control when the heart feels chaos." Translation? Your nervous system is freaking out and it wants to clean the garage. It's not trying to sabotage you. It just wants to feel like it's not helpless. So you say, maybe if I cancel the cable bill, I'll feel better. Maybe if I downsize, I'll stop crying into his flannel shirt. Maybe if I change the will, I'll feel less lost. But here's the catch. Grief doesn't work on your schedule, and it definitely doesn't care how much your cousin thinks your house is worth on Zillow. Evelyn, 75 years young, sharp as a tack, lost her husband, Frank. They'd shared 46 years, one tomato garden and a porch swing with a slightly threatening squeak. A week after the funeral, her nephew Todd shows up in khakis and confidence. "Aunt Evie, the market's hot, you could sell this place and retire to Florida." Now Todd meant well, but Todd also has a man bun and drives a Tesla with crypto plates. Let's just say, not Evelyn's usual source of wisdom. Still, in the fog of sorrow and suggestion, she sold the house. 3 months later, she was sitting in a tidy little apartment above a frozen yogurt shop, asking herself, what have I done? Because she didn't just sell the house, she sold the rituals, the tea kettle whistle, the creaky step on the porch, the walls that still echoed Frank's laughter. Turns out, she didn't need a new place, she needed a pause. There's this very sensible suggestion floating around grief circles. Don't make major financial decisions for a year. But let's put a Ram Dass twist on it, shall we? Don't do anything irreversible while your heart is still screaming into your cereal. In Buddhist terms, it's called upaya, skillful means. In Ram Dass terms, It's knowing when you're too cracked open to pour tea without spilling. Waiting is a weakness. It's spiritual judo. George, God bless him, gave his grandson 30 grand for college 3 weeks after his wife passed. She always wanted him to go to school, he said. A few months later, George couldn't afford the dental work he needed, and that sweet grandson dropped out to become a DJ. Moral of the story? Generosity is beautiful, but grief is a bad accountant. Look, friend, you don't need to be efficient right now. You need to be held. Don't sell the house just because it echoes too loud. Don't write checks to make yourself feel less hollow. Don't let your grief impersonate your judgment. Just sit, breathe, pet the dog, stare at the clouds, cry into the casserole. All perfectly spiritual activities, by the way. And when your heart stops flailing long enough to whisper, that's when you'll know what to do. Until then, trust this. When in doubt, do nothing irreversible. Stay soft, stay sacred, stay home in all the ways that matter. Mistake 4, holding on to every possession without letting go. Our homes, the museums of the heart, not just walls and windows. They're full of ghosts, the good kind, the sound of their laugh from the kitchen, the slippers by the bed, the robe still hanging where they left it, like they might just come back in and say, "What's for dinner?" And part of you knows they won't. But another part of you says, "Let's not move anything, not yet, not ever." I get it. Truly I do. The toothbrush is still in the cup. The old cardigan still smells like them. And by God, you'd swear that scent is holding your life together. So you start tiptoeing around your own house, not changing a thing. Sacred ground. Now here's the thing. A little reverence is beautiful. It's love, after all. But if your home starts feeling like a mausoleum instead of a place you can drop your shoes and breathe, we might have a little problem. Let me tell you about Eleanor. Eleanor was 77 when her husband Samuel passed. He died the way most of us hope to, peacefully in his chair, newspaper folded just right, slippers on. After that, Eleanor didn't touch a thing. I mean nothing. His coffee mug sat there for 2 years, like it was waiting for him to finish it. She said, "It's not that I think he's coming back, Ram Das. I just feel like if I move his things, I'm admitting he's really gone." And I looked at her, not with pity, but with love. And I said, "You're not keeping his things. You're holding your breath." See, grief's funny like that. It convinces us that holding on to a sweater will hold back time, that keeping the robe exactly where it was will somehow protect us from the truth. But truth doesn't work like that. It just stands there, barefoot and patient, waiting for us to exhale. In Buddhism, we talk about impermanence. Everything changes, everything goes. But we're not asked to like it, we're just asked to bow to it. Thich Nhat Hanh said, "The one you love has never truly left, but if you cling to form, you may miss their presence in the formless." And that's where it gets interesting. Eleanor had a granddaughter named Lily, bright-eyed, sharp as a tack, and kind, like butter on a warm biscuit. One day, Lily asked if she could have Samuel's old fountain pen. He used to keep it in his shirt pocket, left side, always, like it was part of his body. Eleanor froze. Then she nodded, and just like that, the pen passed into new hands. And something in Eleanor softened. That one small act opened a door. Not a big one, not dramatic, just a crack. But sometimes that's all we need. Soon she was sorting through drawers, laughing at old photos, crying too, but moving. And not away from Samuel, but toward her own life. She kept his ring, his old flannel shirt, the love that never left. The grief, still there, but now it breathed. You see, letting go of their things isn't letting go of them. It's letting go of the illusion that love is stored in objects. Love's not in the mug, it's in you. And you don't need to keep the house frozen to feel it. So if you're living in a place where time stopped, where every item feels sacred and every drawer untouched, ask yourself, am I preserving love? Or am I afraid to live without a map? You're not doing anything wrong. Grief is weird, loss is sacred, but maybe just maybe, you can keep a few treasures and release the rest with tenderness. Not because they're gone, but because you're still here. And you deserve a house where the window's open, where the coffee's fresh, and where love is not trapped in the past, but living right here with you now. Want me to continue with the next part in the same Ram Dass-inspired voice? Mistake 5. Isolating yourself from friends and family. Grief has this funny little trick it plays on you. Right after your partner dies, the world gets very loud. Cards in the mail, casseroles on the porch, calls from cousins you forgot existed. "How are you doing?" they ask. And your inner voice whispers, they wouldn't get it. And let's be honest, sometimes they really wouldn't. So you smile politely, say fine, and slowly begin disappearing from your own life. You stop answering the phone. You ignore the church bulletin. You see your neighbor walking towards you and suddenly become very interested in a crack on the sidewalk. Not because you're mean, not even because you're depressed yet, but because it just feels easier. Here's the thing though, and I say this as someone who spent a lot of time sitting with sorrow and a cup of tea. A little solitude is sacred, but too much, it starts to rot. The Buddhists call this the middle way. Not too tight, not too loose. You're not supposed to throw yourself into a party the day after the funeral, but you're also not meant to vanish like a monk in a cave either. You're grieving, not auditioning for a ghost story. When we lose someone, especially someone who is part of our everyday, we don't just lose a person, we lose our reflection. You were part of a we. And suddenly, you're an I. That's not just sad, that's existential whiplash. Psychologists call it social withdrawal. Your nervous system says, let's shut it down until we figure out how to keep breathing. Which is smart, until the emergency becomes your new address. Let me tell you about Clarence. Clarence was 80 when his wife June passed. They gardened together for 40 years. Every morning she'd hum, he'd prune, and the roses bloomed like they were in on the love story. After she was gone, he stopped going outside. The garden dried up, so did Clarence. His granddaughter Emily knocked and knocked, left cookies on the porch, no answer. Then one day she hung a photo outside his window, a giant sunflower with June's hands wrapped around the stem, smiling like she'd just told a joke only Clarence would get. He opened the door that day, not to chat, not to heal, just to water one little plant. And that was enough. The Buddhists have a saying, when the heart is broken, let others pour tea. It doesn't mean you need to go to bingo night or join a drum circle, unless you want to. It just means, let someone sit with you while you hurt. Even monks, in all their stillness and serenity, meditate in community. Even the wisest old souls know, healing happens best when someone is close enough to pass the butter. So if you're in the thick of it right now, here's my unshaved, barefoot spiritual advice. Don't rush. Don't fake being fine, but open the door. Just a crack. Let someone in, even if all they do is sit on the porch and say nothing. Because sometimes being seen is the medicine. And connection, even silent, slightly awkward connection, is what pulls us back into the world. One chair, one cookie, one quiet moment at a time. Mistake 6. Denying yourself joy because it feels like betrayal. This one gets us right in the chest, doesn't it? You're walking through the house, maybe you're folding laundry or watching that game show you and your partner used to yell answers at. And then it happens. You laugh, just a little, just for a second, and then you stop. Because somewhere inside there's a voice whispering, should you really be laughing already? Now, that voice isn't mean. It's not even wrong necessarily. It's just confused. It thinks grief is a full-time job. No breaks, no recess, just eternal solemn face. It believes that if you smile, you're letting go. That joy is some kind of betrayal, like dancing at a party while your spouse is stuck waiting outside in the rain. But let's take a breath and look at that. Let me tell you about Lillian. Lillian was 81 when Jack passed, her husband of nearly 60 years. They were the kind of couple that didn't need to talk much. They had a rhythm. He poured the coffee, she buttered the toast. He whistled in the garden. She rolled her eyes and kept weeding. When he died, Lillian went very still. She stopped attending her knitting circle, stopped going to the market where everyone knew her name. Her daughter tried to coax her out. "Come on, Mom, just one walk." But Lillian stayed home, alone, dutifully sad. Then one day, her great-granddaughter came over, a tiny whirlwind in mismatched socks, sticky fingers, and the absolute certainty that raisins are the best food group. She climbed onto Lillian's lap, sniffed the air dramatically, and said, "You smell like raisins." And Lillian laughed. Not a polite chuckle, a real one, the kind that catches you off guard and bubbles up from somewhere you thought had shut down. And right after that laugh came the guilt. She whispered, "Oh, Jack, I'm sorry. I forgot for a second." Now that's where I step in, spiritually speaking, and say, "My dear, Jack isn't disappointed. He's probably laughing with you." Because joy is not betrayal. Joy is breathing again. In Buddhist terms, it's called mudita, sympathetic joy. It's the joy that rises when your heart is open enough to hold both sadness and sweetness at once. You see, the heart is not a filing cabinet. You don't need to choose between grief and joy, and file one away to make room for the other. They can sit side by side, like old friends, one weeping, one giggling. Grief says, "I miss you." Joy says, "I carry you." They're both telling the truth. You are not a monument. You are not a statue in a cemetery garden. You are still alive. A little slower maybe, a little more tender, but still here. And your joy, when it returns, because it will, is not proof that you've forgotten. It's proof that you've remembered love so deeply. It brought you back to life. So when the music plays, dance a little. When the pie is good, take a second slice. And when laughter knocks on the door, open it and say, "You're welcome here too." Mistake 7. Believing that your purpose died with your spouse. There's something strange that happens after someone you've loved, really loved, dies. Not just a boyfriend or a summer romance. I'm talking about the kind of person who knew your laugh before it landed, who could find your glasses before you even noticed they were missing. Your person, your co-pilot, the one who finished your stories and rolled their eyes at your bad jokes. When they go, the silence doesn't just fill the room, it starts whispering in your ear. And it says, "So, what are you even still doing here?" Not in a dramatic Shakespearean way. No one's throwing themselves off balconies. More like, "Should I really go to the potluck without them?" Or, "Do I still matter if I'm not making coffee for two?" It's grief, dressing up as purposelessness. And it's very convincing. You start skipping the art class. You stop writing the Christmas cards. You look around and think, everyone else seems to have a job to do. I'm just here. Well, let me offer you this. If you're still here, then your purpose hasn't left. It might have just changed clothes and stopped announcing itself so loudly. Let me tell you about Margaret. Margaret was 82 when Alan died, her husband of 60 years. She said, "He was the melody, I was the harmony," which is a poetic way of saying, we did everything together, even the boring stuff. After he passed, she stopped showing up to her writing group, stopped journaling. She sat in her robe most days, listening to the wind and wondering if her life had quietly ended too, just without the paperwork. Then one afternoon, her granddaughter dug up a box of Margaret's old poems in the attic, pages filled with little details, like the way Alan used to whistle when he was nervous, or how his thumb always brushed hers during grace at dinner. The granddaughter read them aloud on the porch. And Margaret, she cried, not because they were sad, but because for a brief moment she felt her own voice come back. Later, a teenager, a total stranger, wrote to her and said, "Your poem made me feel less alone." And there it was, a ripple. In Buddhism, we love talking about ripples. You drop a pebble into a pond, plop, and long after it sinks out of sight, the waves keep traveling. You might feel invisible, But your presence, your kindness, your stories, they're still rippling outward, and you never know who's being moved by them. We think purpose has to be big, dramatic, impressive, but sometimes purpose is just being. Being the one who remembers, being the one who listens, being the one who says, "I've been through it too, and look, I'm still standing." A little wobbly, but standing. So don't let that sneaky little voice convince you that you're done. You are not a spare part. You are not a leftover. You are the elder tree whose roots hold the ground together. You are the hand on someone's shoulder. You are the keeper of the stories, and the soup recipes, and the songs no one else remembers how to hum. Your spouse may be gone, but you are still the flame, still the witness, still the teacher. And as long as you're breathing, your presence is your purpose. Sometimes that's all the world needs. So here we are, 7 moments, 7 choices, not commandments, not rules, just invitations. Invitations to be gentle with yourself, to breathe before signing papers, to cry when the house is too quiet, to walk without needing a destination, to love again, not because you've moved on, but because love moves through. Let's remember what we've learned together. We began by talking about how grief is not a state of emergency. It's not something to rush or fix. It's a sacred unfolding. And when we rush that unfolding, we risk things: our health, our security, our peace. You saw how rushing into new relationships can be more about escaping loneliness than inviting connection. How neglecting your body isn't noble. It's just forgetting that you're still here and still worthy of care. How holding on to every item may feel like love, but sometimes it's grief trying to anchor itself in dust. We talked about money and the quiet danger of signing things when your heart is still bleeding. And maybe most beautifully, we touched on purpose. How it doesn't die with your partner. It just changes shape. Sometimes it sounds like laughter. Sometimes it looks like a quilt made from old letters. Sometimes it's just being present when someone else needs to hear. I've been there too. And if nothing else, please remember this. Joy is not betrayal. It's a sign that your heart is still alive. That love didn't leave, it just moved inside you. So if any part of this video stirred something in you, a memory, a breath, a quiet yes, leave a comment below. Not for me, but for someone else who might need to hear your story. And if you'd like more moments like this, more space to grieve, reflect, and gently move forward, subscribe to this channel, Buddhist Wisdom for the Elderly. We're walking a quiet path toward 1,000 subscribers, and every step we take with you helps us create more content for people navigating this sacred season of life. If you found peace here, click like, not for algorithms, but as a little digital candle lit for someone else who's grieving. And maybe share this with a friend who needs it. Because the truth is, none of us are really alone. We're all just walking each other home. Until next time, be kind to yourself, let joy sit beside your sorrow, and remember, you're still here, and that means something.